I don't think we're going to see a world where crypto rails replace TradFi for things that are already on TradFi. There's just not a lot of margin to be squeezed out in the traditional space anymore. And so I think we'll see a lot of those people start to focus more on crypto simply because there's a whole new types of asset classes available that are going to really change the dynamic of how trading works on crypto.
Permissionless 4 is right around the corner, June 24th to 26th in Brooklyn, New York. We're seeing new crypto applications cropping up all over the place right now. And this conference will be a place to get developers, investors, and founders all in the same place to have high-signal conversations about what crypto's future should look like. This one's for the memers, the dreamers, the builders, and the token lovers. Don't miss out. Plus, you can use the code Lightspeed10 for 10% off at checkout.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lightspeed. I'm joined today by Austin Federa, co-founder of DoubleZero. Austin, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Two guys from New York, all the way in Istanbul, getting in the studio.
I know, I was hoping there'd be some cats around here, but...
Yeah, very sad. I've seen so many cats,
Oh,
actually.
yeah. I meant in the studio.
I know.
That was the hope.
Can't ask for too much these days.
That's true.
Can't ask for too much. It's a nice studio, though.
Yeah, it is.
So, Austin, DoubleZero, one of the buzziest, I think, most interesting projects in Solana right now. We just had you on 4 or 5 months ago to kind of give the whole overview, so I encourage folks, go watch that episode. It was really good. So we can skip some of the preliminaries of just what is DoubleZero. I guess I want to start by asking, what's the update? I know you did a validator token sale.
Yeah.
How did that go? How's the fiber network growth, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so, I mean, we're building a physical fiber infrastructure network contributed by multiple independent contributors. And so there's a bunch of words that go into that are kind of like worth breaking down. So at this point, we have 6 independent contributors that are coming on board to contribute physical fiber links to the DoubleZero network. We have a testnet up and running that we launched in, I think, mid-February, if I remember correctly. So we have about 30 validators connected to that today. This is a mix of Solana mainnet validators and testnet validators, mostly mainnet validators that are producing blocks on Solana mainnet and running on the DoubleZero network. And so our testnet is really for like testing the technology platform and those sorts of things. And while mainnet's getting built out. And so it's our slowest links in the network because we're saving the best ones for mainnet. But yeah, things are going well on that build out. We just did a token sale open only to validators on CoinList. I don't think anyone's ever done this before. But basically what people did is they had to come in and they had to go through all the normal KYC that you go through for CoinList or any of these type of platforms. And then they had to put in their validator pub key and they had to sign with their validator pub key to basically prove that, like, hey, I run this validator, or at the very least, I have access to the keys for this validator, which we're going to count as good enough. And the whole idea here was like, our core community are validators, right? The most important part of the DoubleZero network, the fiber providers. The second most important part are the validators. And so, you know, one of the really cool things that Solana did in the early days, and it was kind of totally accidental just because they were running out of money, but in 2020, they did a validator sale effectively. They sold tokens to validators to sort of help keep Solana Labs alive. And that turned out to be an incredible tool for alignment over the long term because these validators, you know, had what turned into life-changing amounts of money from this. And so our whole thing on this was not like, you know, who knows what this would be in the future monetarily wise, but that the goal of any type of community sale is to align your most loyal and important participants. And for us, that's the validator network.
Interesting. Why'd you go with the 2Z as the ticker, by the way? I thought it was an interesting ticker.
Yeah, you know, sometimes you just got to do stuff differently. And I think tickers are really psychologically important. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, we might as well try something a little bit different, see if we break some regex on some exchanges.
Did you ever consider 0-0? That would have been really like chaos.
That would have been pure chaos, especially with the way that pub keys often work. So no, we didn't go quite that far. And DZ just felt like just off.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Too on the nose.
Yeah.
Remind me what's the utility of the DoubleZero token within the network?
Sure. So this is actually like, I want to get into some of this mechanism stuff because I think it's pretty cool. But the DoubleZero token is what you use to pay your transit fees on the network. So validators pay it as a portion of their earnings. We allow them to pay in native currency, but then we swap that into the DoubleZero token, and that's actually ultimately what is paid on the network and what goes out to bandwidth contributors as rewards. And then RPCs have the same type of function where they pay in 2Z tokens and other types of users of the network. We don't have any smart contract layer that's sort of user deployable or anything along those lines, so there's no program deployments or something like that. It's like a true utility token.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And you mentioned you had 6 people onboarded to your testnet. Are you able to say like...
So we have six fiber providers.
6 providers,
right?
Yeah.
So that includes, basically everything from like Galaxy and Distributed Global, which were 2 of the earliest to sign up. Rockaway X recently announced they're bringing connectivity into Prague and a few other places. We have TerraSwitch and Latitude as bare metal and network providers, and Galaxy as well. Okay,
so a lot of like crypto native. I mean, Rockaway is, I guess, an investor.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because when this was coming out, there was a lot of, your white paper describes where you might find demand to contribute fiber to this network, but it obviously needs to be proven out. So like, I'm curious where you're seeing demand to lend fiber to the network coming from.
Yeah, it's actually more diverse than I thought it would be, right? We have 2 bare metal providers, we have 2 basically venture capital firms, and we have 2 trading firms. Mm-hmm. I expected it mostly to be trading firms in the early days, honestly, because VCs tend to not want to do anything that's ops heavy. And bare metal providers, I mean, there was a whole conversation to basically help them understand this was not competitive, that we're not trying to take their business or take their validators. We're trying to, if anything, make their data centers more attractive for validators to run in.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What about dark fiber? I was always a big fan of dark fiber.
Yeah.
Are you tapping this unused fiber capacity in the world?
So at the level we're doing right now, mostly what we're using is existing lit fiber. And so this is something like, a group like Jump Trading. They run a huge amount of fiber all around the world. They don't own the fiber, they lease it, because they move to whatever's fastest when the lease expires. But the function that they're doing basically is carving out a portion of that network and contributing it to DoubleZero. So there's folks who have existing networks that are doing that. And then there are folks like, Rockaway or Distributed Global that don't have an existing fiber network. So what they're doing is they're going out and they're working with basically like Verizons of the world and those types of companies to acquire, wavelengths on existing fiber. And so lighting up dark fiber can be a very expensive proposition, and we'll get to the demand level someday where we need that. But the optical terminals and the multiplexers, the stuff that basically goes on the ends of the fiber, that can be $2 million in equipment costs. Mm-hmm. So we're starting off with like using existing fiber that's already lit. We'll then probably move into dark fiber, and who knows, maybe someday we'll be running our own fiber.
Mm. Are you able to say when mainnet is?
Yeah. So we've actually, we've talked a bit about this publicly, but we're targeting Q3 for a mainnet launch. Mm-hmm. And that'll be mainnet launch for us is basically token functionality on the network, multiple independent contributors, and the ability for a validator to sign up permissionlessly.
Solana's been hot lately, but you can truly never fade Bitcoin. Are you a Solana user who wants to get exposure to Bitcoin? Mint zenBTC to get that Bitcoin exposure with yield and some rewards to boot. zenBTC is the first application launched on Zenrock, a permissionless decentralized custody network backed by One Roundtable partners, 10T, Maven 11, and Spartan. Live on Jupiter, ROC is the native token for transactions within the Zenrock ecosystem and secures Zenrock's decentralized custody network. zenBTC is secured by Zenrock Decentralized Custody, and it ensures that Bitcoin holders can securely and seamlessly earn yield on their favorite chain, like Solana. Visit zenBTC.io to learn about earning yield with Bitcoin on Solana.
One interesting piece that came out of the validator token sale was you revealed that there's like a 5% seed fee for validators to use the DoubleZero network.
Yeah.
Which struck me as high, but I guess the counter argument is if you get more than 5% of like value back, then it's a plus EV trade for a validator. So
Yeah.
what justifies that fee, or what thinking went into it?
Sure. So we're not starting out with 5%, I'll say. We'll start out with a much lower number and kind of ramp up as we can prove out value. But these systems are expensive, right? And it is, I think, reasonable to ask stakers to pay for the ability for the network to move past what the public internet is fundamentally capable of. What you said is exactly the pitch. Like, if we make Solana twice as performant and has twice as much block space, validators will make more than 5% more, right? Stakers will make more than 5% more. And so, folks can be very, I will say there's this weird thing that happens, and it's kind of validator specific, where all of the sort of abundance mindset goes away whenever you're looking at unit economics. And the problem is the way validators are set up is people think about them as unit economics, but they're not. They're network economics. The fundamental driver of is your validator profitable or unprofitable is not your commission rate. It's not your block rewards. It's the price of SOL. It's the price of Ether. It's the price of the digital asset for which you're valuing. And those fluctuate by such high numbers that, like, people just miss the forest through the trees, right? They're like, I want to get my 4.92% staking reward, and I couldn't possibly go to 4.87% or something along those lines. And what they totally miss is, like, you could, if you technically doubled your APY and the price of SOL halved, I don't think people would be happy about that.
Yeah.
Right? And so some of the questions here are like, what does the future of Solana look like? What is your, and I don't have a value formula for this, but many people do. What is the value formula you're looking at if Solana can do 250,000 transactions per second? I'm guessing it's more than 5% more valuable than it is today, but who knows? I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. But the Solana network itself is not transitioning to DoubleZero. It's individual validators. So I'm curious, like, what is the benefit to me as a validator if I switch to DoubleZero? Like, is the rest of the network still at the speed of the public internet? So Anza has publicly said that they are committed to doubling compute units in this year by the end of 2025. So suddenly we go from 50 million to 100 million CUs. There's a whole bunch of validators now that, based on where their physical distance is, they're not going to be able to keep up, right? If we start to increase the data rate, increase the complexity of transactions, and we should be doing all of those things. And they can opt to do one of two things. They can opt to move closer to the geographic core, or they can opt to join something like DoubleZero. And so our pitch to validators, and again, we're not starting out with a 5% or something like that, is like, you probably want to show up and help make the network faster, right? And so there's a sort of interesting collective action problem here, where in some ways each validator is incentivized to wait, but I think crypto is better than that. I think that what we will probably see, and what I hope we'll see, is we'll see stakers prioritizing nodes that are willing to do things like try DoubleZero. And we have some sort of like turbochargers on this too, and one of the main ones is Jito is very likely to be more profitable on DoubleZero than it is without DoubleZero. Yeah. And
so they're going to be sending bundles to DoubleZero nodes that they're not necessarily sending out to other validators, because they know exactly how much time it takes to get there. There's all this stuff that they can do when they have much more deterministic networking than they get over the public internet. And so we've seen validators move data centers for 10 basis points of additional MEV. So if we can deliver just a little bit of additional value, I think we will have validators joining the DoubleZero network.
Is there a benefit to stakers? Like, do you see DoubleZero's validators being able to attract more stake by virtue of running on DoubleZero?
I hope so. That would be nice. I think one of the things... Is there like an
economic reason though?
Yeah, I mean, if a validator, if MEV rewards go up because they're now able to exploit different types of MEV they weren't able to before, that would obviously be reflected for stakers as well. The interesting thing here is there's a real bifurcation in where validators make money. Larger professional validators run by like companies, they don't make most of their money on chain. right? They're not fundamentally, their income stream is not block rewards and commission. It is other types of value add services around running a validator, whether that is order flow because it's the drift validator, or whether that is, state propagation and looks at what's coming off the blockchain, like it might be for, a temporal or something like that. There's a real difference in business models there. And so I think the smaller validators are going to be in a position where they need to sort of adapt to that changing world. And I think one way that they're going to be able to keep stakers excited about them and using them is to being able to say things like, hey, we're part of making the Solana network faster. And we think there will be rewards around that too. I think that like you look around and you look at like even one additional credit on TBC is more than makes up for the cost there.
Mm-hmm. So to be concrete, like how much of the Solana network stake needs to be running on DoubleZero before it sees these like latency improvements that DoubleZero would offer?
So an individual validator will benefit from running on DoubleZero day one. Mm-hmm. It's hard to quantify exactly how much that benefit is, but they'll definitely benefit relative to public internet simply because we provide the FPGA filtration layer around it. And so they're going to, when it's their turn to build a block, they're less likely to be saturated with too much inbound traffic. They won't have to sort through a bunch of invalid signatures and things that fail signature verification. And so they'll be able to build more profitable blocks just because they'll have more time to look through and figure out what to include in that block. Going past that, I think it really depends how fast Anza increases cluster parameters. So one of the things that, we've been talking with them about is like stress testing. Like if we have a cluster set up on DoubleZero, how fast can that go relative to one that's on the public internet? And that's kind of one of the main pushes right now is like get the parameters of the cluster even faster, go from 50 million CUs today to 500 million CUs. See what happens, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, like there's a lot of networks now that are like trying to be fast, and most are resorting to centralization to get there. And I don't mean that in like a dirty way, but like they're just running in regions, and it's a smaller TAM when you run in a region. And so, Solana can choose to do that future if it wants to, but I think that would be detrimental. And I haven't seen anything from core engineering, from Foundation, from Labs, from Anza, from anyone who makes me think they're on that trajectory. But that would be like a worse trajectory for the network. At the same time, staying as a global execution environment that runs on the public internet, I mean, I wouldn't say we're at like the best you could ever get, but I don't think we're going to get an order of magnitude change without either massively reducing the validator set or switching to new technologies like DoubleZero.
So let's say hypothetically, like a number of validators adopt DoubleZero. The exchanges are like, no, we have a good thing going. We don't care. We're not going to like pay the seat fee. Then there's like an additional number of validators who are just like, AFK and haven't really like seen what's going on. Like,
sure.
So say like 50% hypothetically on DoubleZero. Does the Solana network see noticeable improvements at that point?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it depends on stake weight as much as it depends on number of validators too, I'll say. But there's other things that kind of go into this. One is like we do have open peering policies. So if someone else wants to build a DoubleZero competitor, they can go ahead and do that. And we'll happily allow connections in and those sorts of things, just the same way you get on the public internet. But I think what we'll be looking at through these systems is just as long as we can prove to folks, as long as we can prove to folks they can make more money, that's the goal, right? If we haven't done that, that's on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to get into just more broadly, like the future of Solana and some of these high throughput chains. Something that you've spoken about a bit in the past is basically that like latency in terms of like what your block time is as an empty metric doesn't mean much. And it also matters like how quickly the global ledger is updated. So like with all of these conversations about bases sub blocks or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Mega ETH coming to market with 10 millisecond block times. Like, what do these latency metrics, and I guess you could throw in like TPS and things like that, what do they actually mean, and like what is the need for these for like what does speed actually functionally do for you as a blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, so all models are wrong and some are useful, and that also applies to metrics, right? And so when you're talking about what is like the system latency, it's a very hard thing to actually know what we're talking about. So if someone says on a multi-validator set like Solana, there's 400 millisecond block times, that's not necessarily 400 millisecond latency. What that is like, once your transaction gets to a validator, the longest it could take for inclusion, if it's in that block, is 400 milliseconds. But within that, you have to think about what's actually going on. Like, no one thinks about like, oh, the New York Stock Exchange is a 50 nanosecond latency. Like, the latency of the New York Stock Exchange is the speed of light over fiber getting to the servers to even begin to execute the trade. So a lot of people, when they talk about like, oh, our latency is like X or Y or Z, and they give a small number like 10 milliseconds, what they're actually talking about is how long does it take their system to process something coming into it. And 10 milliseconds is an incredibly long time for a system like this. Any sort of high performance system, if you already have the data inside the NIC of the computer, 10 milliseconds is actually very slow. Like, that is a number that would make anyone working in TradFi cry. If once the data gets into your server, it takes you 10 milliseconds to take action on it, that's like abysmal, right? And so we have to really think about what we're talking about here. So Solana does these things with shreds where it basically creates pre-confirmations, which are the same thing you get on something like Base, every roughly 10 to 15 milliseconds, every time it hits one shred. So we have to kind of like look at what we're talking about when it comes to this stuff. The overall system latency, and once you get outside of that single sequencer, is still different. So just because your transaction got into this sequencer and got included in the sequencer doesn't mean anyone knows about it yet. The sequencer then has to broadcast that data out to the RPC network so they can update basically what's in their databases. And that's when a market actually moves, right? So it's sort of like if a market moves and no one observes it, did it actually move? Is sort of the way to think about that.
Is there like a more objective standard by which to measure how usefully fast blockchains are? Because you're sort of explaining how there's different ways to think about block times, I guess. So like, is there an objective standard by which you could say this thing is faster for real people?
Sure. So let's take like the Base or Mega ETH example, right? In both situations, those are single sequencer architectures. So it might be 10 milliseconds for the person co-locating in the data center. It's not 10 milliseconds for the person in Singapore or the person in New York, depending on where it's run. You have to deal with the fact that light moves pretty slow, and light through fiber moves even slower. And so it takes a meaningful amount of time for a packet sent from Singapore to arrive at wherever the sequencer is located. And once that happens, like, okay, great, you know, we've now built a system that's really fast for trading if you are right next to it. That's a centralized exchange at that point, right? Those are the same characteristics as a centralized exchange. And there's nothing like inherently wrong with that, but that is no longer like a globally distributed, fair, equal access blockchain network. That is something else. And that something else is worthy. People should be building these things. But if what you have to do is basically do what happens in TradFi and, you know, co-locate as close as possible around one of these sequencers, I don't think that really is the future we've all been promised, right? If you look at the multiple concurrent leaders on Solana, that's like a much more geographically fair proposal for how we do these types of things. You can have multiple sequencers in multiple areas, but the minute you like have two sequencers on opposite sides of the world, you don't have 10 millisecond latency anymore. You may have 10 millisecond confirmation times, but those two sequencers need to talk to one another before something can truly be included in a block.
How fast could, like, so Firedancer is going to come out. It's supposed to be more performant the full version than what is currently on the market. Say you take Firedancer and add DoubleZero to it. Like, how fast do you think Solana could get, if it's possible to estimate such a thing?
It's very hard to estimate these things because real world load is very different than test load, even if you build incredible tests. I will say Agave has gotten quite fast recently too. Like the newest releases are quite performant. But if you go to Breakpoint from 2024, there was a demo that the Firedancer team ran showing 1 million transactions per second running on, I think it was 6 nodes and 4 continents. And that was running on the DoubleZero network. And that demo would not have worked on the public internet. So we don't know what the upper threshold is. It is certainly a software limit. Like what'll happen, so like what happens in all good systems is there's this kind of push and pull between hardware and software. And so the software gets fast enough that the public internet becomes a bottleneck. So what do? We build DoubleZero V1. And then, oh man, we found a bunch of software bugs that we didn't realize were bugs, but when you get to a certain data rate, well, it's a software problem now. Then they fix a bunch of stuff, and then suddenly DoubleZero version 1 becomes the limiting factor, right? And we have to go, okay, we got to go get more bandwidth. We got to think about if we start incorporating shortwave or microwave towers or satellites into this thing. And then we go do a bunch of work, and then software does a bunch of work again. And this is kind of like this, like, you see this cycle of like 2 basically tidally locked forces in software scaling or any type of system scaling. You see this in like bundling and unbundling, like these macro market trends where like everyone's bundling stuff and everyone's unbundling stuff again. For high performance software computing, it's the exact same thing. There's this constant push and pull between, like, for a few years the software's faster, for a few years the hardware's faster, and then these things oscillate back and forth. And so for me, true success for the first release of DoubleZero will be when it is the limiting factor for a validator client, not the validator client being a limiting factor for DoubleZero.
Interesting. That makes sense.
Solana's been hot lately, but you can truly never fade Bitcoin. Are you a Solana user who wants to get exposure to Bitcoin? Mint zenBTC to get that Bitcoin exposure with yield and some rewards to boot. zenBTC is the first application launched on Zenrock, a permissionless decentralized custody network backed by One Roundtable partners, 10T, Maven 11, and Spartan. Live on Jupiter, ROC is the native token for transactions within the Zenrock ecosystem and secures Zenrock's decentralized custody network. zenBTC is secured by Zenrock Decentralized Custody, and it ensures that Bitcoin holders can securely and seamlessly earn yield on their favorite chain, like Solana. Visit zenbtc.io to learn about earning yield with Bitcoin on Solana.
One thing, you had an interesting tweet a couple days ago, basically where Anatoly was like, give me your best FUD. And you were like, if Solana doesn't implement multiple concurrent leaders by the end of 2027, like co-located networks like Hyperliquid will surpass it, or some. I'm paraphrasing a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe say more about that. And then I'm also just curious to hear, like, is DoubleZero opinionated towards like truly globally decentralized blockchains like Solana, or are you okay, or would you work in a future where you have these like not as decentralized systems like Hyperliquid?
So DoubleZero is building base layer neutral infrastructure. So we will work with anyone on any type of project, blockchain or non-blockchain, that requires the technology packages that like the protocol can offer. We're starting with Solana because Solana is the place where there's the strongest product market fit today, and it has the most to benefit today from this stuff. But I have no doubt that, folks building L2s or folks building other L1s like Aptos or Sui would also benefit from operating on DoubleZero, and we'd love to work with them as well. The multiple concurrent leaders tweet is not necessarily about something overtaking Solana, but it is similar to what has happened with Ethereum over the last few years, where Ethereum was the complete market dominant, unquestioned execution and settlement king. And what we've kind of seen is like the L2s have been parasitic in a lot of ways. They have pulled a lot of execution value out. And so the value of Ether is now lower. Then the mind share of what's going on in the Ethereum network is also much lower. And so it's not to say that like Solana would fail or would stop being like an incredible place to build, But suddenly, like right now, if you want to build something fast, it is 85% of the mind share at this point. And maybe that drops, right? Because what you get with something like Hyperliquid, which like is unabashedly just operating in data centers in Tokyo, they have no desire to go further out from there right now, is you basically have the world's best centralized exchange. And I don't mean centralized from a like one person has all the keys, but like centralized from the perspective of Hyperliquid's not a great trading experience if you're in New York. Right? For all the TradFi latency reasons we've talked about before, it's a very good trading experience if you're in Asia or if you're in Tokyo. And so I think what we would see is a lot of these sort of like isolated regional chains not surpassing Solana in total market cap, the way there's no L2 that is bigger than Ethereum or even close to being bigger than Ethereum or even close to being bigger than many Alt L1s at this point. But collectively, they've had this force which has pulled some oxygen out of the Ethereum ecosystem. And I could see the same thing happening on Solana if suddenly there's opportunity for Sonic and Eclipse and, you know, all these other types of SVM or other fast execution environments could come up. Now, I think realistically, it is still very much a positive sum world, and Solana can ship multiple concurrent leaders, and Hyperliquid can go take on Binance and OKX and like try and do battle there. And I think we'll probably have other types of regional chains, whether if it's something like Fogo or Mega ETHs, you know, multiple follow the sun sequencer model that start taking on more TradFi type stuff. But I do think that like there's a very interesting interplay there that is going to show up over the next 3 years.
It's interesting to hear you say that. I think like for a long time, there was this sense of like, yeah, centralized exchanges are more performant, they're faster, but you should do DeFi because it's decentralized and like nobody can censor you or whatever. With things like Hyperliquid, we know that if you exploit the HLP vault, you know, Jeff and the other validators, I guess, can like decide to take away those earnings.
Sure. I mean, but none of that, I mean, that could all happen if Hyperliquid were a globally distributed network as well. That's just about who holds the keys and who holds the power, right? That same dynamic could take place on any network that doesn't have a robust multi-party system at the moment. So that'd be my pushback, is it's not inherent to like the governance and sort of social management of a system is not necessarily inherent to the technology stack. It's that like Base's validator sequencer is run in one data center. And if you are trading from a data center further away, you are disadvantaged. It's different on a network like Solana, where yes, there may be stake concentration in certain markets, but like if you have to run infrastructure all over the world if you're trying to always be co-locating next to Solana, and that becomes untenable at some point.
Okay.
And so the argument there is not that like you couldn't have a Tokyo-centric perps decentralized exchange built on its own L1 blockchain. You could totally build that, and you could have a world where it is, maybe not geographically distributed, but it is socially distributed and physically distributed to the point where it has many of the same properties of a globally distributed system. It just happens to that the globe is just Japan for that system.
Let me ask you a broad, vague question, which is, do ideals matter in crypto anymore? And I guess I'll offer 2 points. One, being Hyperliquid. I think there's this sense, Ryan Connor at Blockworks likes to talk a lot about consumers' stated versus revealed preferences. You know, you may say that you care a lot about decentralization, that's why you like crypto, but if you get a better trading experience on Hyperliquid, knowing that it's not as decentralized, you'll still use the platform. The second one, Bitcoin, was always the kind of, anti-government freedom money, but then there was a ton of tailwinds for Bitcoin on the chance that the US government would start market buying Bitcoin to like fix the national debt or whatever. So with those two, I just wonder, like, do ideals truly matter anymore, or is it all number go up?
No, ideals definitely matter, but ideals are not fixed, right? Like One of the curses of the modern age is everything is recorded. And so you can go back 7 years and you can find someone saying something that doesn't match with their position today. And there's a lot of ways to look at this, but one of this is just evolution of a social system trying to find the right piece, right? Like, would Bitcoin be a better product if it was still bunker coin, right? And there was some, like, if you could snap your fingers and get the government totally out of Bitcoin, not the government, ETFs are gone, MicroStrategy is gone, right? All these types of things are gone. I don't know if that would make Bitcoin better, right? Because something starts with like I love the Bitcoin example because like it shows how these things evolve over time. Bitcoin starts out in a world where it has no option except to be a fully libertarian rejection of the system. But over time, it starts to slightly change the system. And so, you know, you can think of it as a failure that it was brought in, but like any successful system of change inherently becomes part of the system. It's like a tautology, right? Like you can own, like if the student radicals are in power, suddenly they're not student radicals anymore. They're just called senators, right? And so like we can think of this as a failure of Bitcoin that, oh God, it's got a ETF now and it's got Michael Saylor and it's got, or we can say like, wow, look at how successful Bitcoin has been at changing the perception of the TradFi market and the global market from an era where it thought the only safe store of value was gold and the US dollar to one where it says gold, the US dollar, and Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And that's really, really interesting. On the Hyperliquid side of things, I don't think the right way to look at it is like, oh, Hyperliquid's much less decentralized than Ethereum. It's Hyperliquid is a hell of a lot more decentralized than Binance. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the game, I think. The expressed preferences of consumers are that they prefer trading on a slightly more decentralized, centralized exchange over a fully centralized exchange. Like Binance, not just Binance, but like Hyperliquid is eating into the perps volume of a lot of these centralized places that were for years the best place to trade perps. You know, I think you can make an argument that Hyperliquid is less mature. There's a technical security and technical stability arguments you can make. But Binance is run by one party. Coinbase is run by one party. Even if Hyperliquid's only run by 6 parties, that's still more.
When you talk about DoubleZero, you like to use the TradFi market example of like, you know, who does Jane Street use for their bandwidth needs? I'm curious if you think that there is a world where like TradFi firms begin to seriously use crypto and blockchains for their trading stuff. Like a lot of the TradFi things on chain today, I think are more like tokenized treasuries, mm-hmm. tokenized private credit. It's not like the true decentralized NASDAQ vision. Do you think that ever becomes a reality? And like, what are the prerequisites for that to happen?
That's a good question. I see them as concurrent, but only for stuff that's not traded on the centralized exchange, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ways to look at this, but one is like, there's so much money to be made through speed in TradFi that the incentives and the R&D budgets of these TradFi firms, just on their connectivity between exchanges, probably exceeds all money raised by crypto in the last few years. And we've had some pretty big raises in the last few years, right? Because like if you can be smart or fast, you should choose fast every time. Because you can be smart and be wrong. It's very hard to be fast and be wrong. You're not going to be as right, but you're just going to be taking a 1/10 of a basis point on every trade, but like that adds up real quick. So I don't think we're going to see a world where crypto rails replace TradFi for things that are already on TradFi. Mm-hmm. I think what we will likely see though are, and we see this already, is that there's not more profit to be made in crypto, but there's different types of profit to be made because the networks are less mature, because they are globally distributed and decentralized, right? It it takes a lot more work to understand them and to be able to operate on them. But like market makers in crypto, like there is no real market making in TradFi, right? Like market making in TradFi is basically just called trading. Like effectively the role, like people get like high frequency trading like wrong all the time. Most of what high frequency trading is doing is stabilizing price, which is exactly what a market maker does in a crypto exchange, right? And so there's just not a lot of margin to be squeezed out in the traditional space anymore. And so I think we'll see a lot of those people start to focus more on crypto simply because there's a whole new types of asset classes available that are going to really change the dynamic of how trading works on crypto.
I like that. That's an interesting point to end on. Austin Federa, insightful, interesting as always. Thank you so much for taking the time to come chat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please like, subscribe, 5-star rate. Wherever you get your podcasts, do all the things. If you enjoyed this, please share it with a friend, and we'll see you all again very soon.